Leadership. We all want to do it, and we all want to do it well. But what is good leadership exactly? I think we all come into this room with preconceptions of what leadership actually is, right? Something along the lines of product vision, having a large org, maybe giving back, or thought leadership. So of course, we're not going to talk about any of these things. The problem with these things is that you can't tell what's the chicken and what's the egg. Like, are you a good leader because you're running a large org? Or do you get to run a large org because you're a good leader? So instead, what I do want to talk about is the theme of today's session, authentic leadership. And as Kat just mentioned, it's about bringing your uniqueness to defining leadership. Now, I do find, as much as I ascribe to authentic leadership, there is one big challenge with it, and that is what Kat has just been talking about in terms of bringing a tool set to that. If there is uniqueness to leadership, then that means there's a million methods that you can follow, right? And if you do go into the literature, there is that. There is styles-based leadership, servant leadership, psychodynamic approaches. My favorite one, the crucible leadership, where you throw yourself into extreme hardship to rise out of the ashes. Very modern. The problem with that, though, is how do you choose? How do you know what's you? Well, I don't know you. But what I have found is that there's some commonalities to how people approach finding themselves. And these commonalities have formed my personal mental model of leadership that I want to share with you today. But first, I want to share 3 personal stories. First, when I was in college, I was involved in running a technology conference. One year, Helene Armitage came. She was the most senior woman VP at IPM at the time, and I was completely enamored with her. I thought I could learn a lot from her, so by the time she showed up in the conference center, I followed her around like a puppy. Her Q&A session came around, and I was sitting at the edge of my seat, hanging on to every word. And finally, someone asked her the question that I wanted to ask, but was too shy to ask, and that was, what advice do you give people to get to leadership? She took up the mic, but she only said one thing. She said, keep doing what you love. Now, I had a ton of problem with this. The only thing that I knew I loved at that time was my boyfriend. Brought a whole new meaning to the advice. So I left generally disappointed. Now, fast forward a few years. I've now graduated, and I'm doing analytics consulting for telcos. My first ever annual review came up, and I was super nervous. Thankfully, I got a good review. But when I asked my boss what I did to deserve that review, it was the same bafflement. She said, Sylvia, it's not what you did, it's what you didn't do. Now here I was thinking, the things that I did, the things I said yes to, was a small, finite amount of things. What I didn't do, what I said no to, well, that was just an infinite amount. So this advice wasn't good feedback at all, unless you count not doing what the intern was doing at the time. He was sleeping in client meetings. So, fast forward again. I'm now working in product, and my team is tasked with building a data product from scratch. Now, I knew this was going to be a problematic project from the beginning. The team members were all new. A lot of us hadn't worked on data products before. The roles and responsibilities, because we were new, hadn't been entirely defined, and it wasn't clear how we're going to hit our project goals. So in cases like these, I tend to think you need to add a lot of detail really soon. Start digging into your user stories, define your problem statements, get into high-fidelity mocks. And so I sent out a ton of animated GIFs. Later on, I pulled in one of my key project members. This is when the project had started to get on its track. And I asked her, why didn't you step up to lead? It would have spared us all from these animated GIFs, because that really pulls me out of my comfort zone, if we had just a little bit more leadership on this project. And she sat thinking about it for a while, and eventually she said, I didn't realize I had permission from you. So what did I learn from all of these stories? Well, I actually missed Helene Armitage's advice, I think. I kept on focusing on the fact that I didn't have something I loved. But really, the keep doing part is more important. Because if you don't know what your passion is, keep doing will get you there. And similarly, in hindsight, I think my boss was actually giving me credit for prioritizing well. When she was saying that it's about what I didn't do, what she was really saying is that I'm saying no to the right things. And of course, we really shouldn't be asking for permission or needing permission to take on leadership action. So what I have come to realize is that no matter how you personally define awesome leadership, you can get there by doing your way through. It's by focusing not on what you want to be, but what you want to do. So here's where my mental model comes in. I encounter a lot of people in this mode. You dream of being either the VP or the chief product officer sitting on the top of your company. And there's nothing wrong with this, but I feel like this model actually serves you much better, which is changing the thinking into, if you want to be at the top of that mountain, you're going to have to solve some really big, hairy problem. And because you can't get there overnight, you'll have to define some next steps. Because it's not going to be an easy slog, you're going to need those things that we just talked about. You need to prioritize well. You need to have the right mindset and not wait for permission. And you need to keep doing. Persistence above everything else. So for example, before I was a GM at Shopify, I was not really thinking this on most days, just maybe a little. Mostly, I was thinking this, that I need to help the aspiring entrepreneurs coming to Shopify to actually be successful. And with that, I had a few next steps in mind. And I actually think this model ended up giving me an edge, because when the GM job finally came around, I was in the interview for the job, and I was asked, what would you do if you didn't get this job? And because I had this mental model, I was actually fairly confident in saying, nothing much. You're looking for somebody to do and solve this problem, do this work and solve this problem. I'm going to be doing it regardless. The only difference is that I think I'll be able to get there faster if I get the job, because you are actively investing in me as a company. So I did get the job. What followed was my roadmap, 6 months of research on the products that my team is currently working on now. What's interesting is that I think this is what we all naturally do as product managers. We set a goal, and we create a roadmap to get there. But somehow, I feel like when it comes to our own careers, we don't necessarily don't always put the same care and time into it. So I still find that I talk to a lot of people who are asking me how to get to director or VP level without having thought of the problems that they're going to need to solve to deserve those titles. And also, I run into people who have set a goal at the top of the mountain that I unfortunately think won't bring enough value to their company. So how do you do this well? So I've got 3 tips. And these are actually the things that I look for when I interview for director-level candidates at Shopify. First tip is customer outcome exception. And this sounds really basic, but I do still go into a lot of interviews where when I ask the candidates what they've worked on, they tell me that everything they've worked on in the last 5 years are company problems, not customer problems. And that, to me, is just a red flag. If you don't know what the goal should be at the top of your mountain, talk to your customers. They'll orient you. Second tip is to be happy to influence. If you're at the bottom of this mountain, trying to take the next step, the easiest thing to do is to take a next step that's within your circle of control. Right? It's easy to do something with the team that you have been given, your direct team. But really, that limits your success, because we all know in order to solve real large, big problems, you're going to have to influence people outside of your direct team in order to solve your problems. And that is hard. It's hard to influence on your own, but I think what trips most people up isn't the fact that they can't influence. It's the fact that if they were able to influence, the success is no longer theirs. It's somebody else's. And getting over that is not easy. So my tip here is actually to, over time, learn to be happy that you have, through leadership, contributed to the success of others. And practically speaking, when I do interviews, I look for people who happily, quote unquote, gave away scope. Last tip, it's the courage to be disliked. And this honestly is related to being a woman, and I think Charmaine just talked about this. Research shows that overall leadership skills between men and women are exactly equal. The research also shows that women are a lot light when we lead. That's right. Everything we are talking about today risks all of us not being liked. So you know what? Screw being liked. We can't make a larger dent on gender imbalance in leadership by aiming to please. This particular book, The Courage to be Disliked, is something that has helped me, so I highly recommend it for you. But if you're anything like me, no matter what you do, you will still have your days, well, you'll find it hard. And just circling back to the point of this talk, doing will help. It's much harder for someone to say, much easier for someone to say that you can't be the VP than it is for them to say that you can't solve a particular problem. And it's much harder to be down on you if you are delivering customer value, bringing success to a team wider than your own. And of course, if you don't care about being disliked, well, no one has the power over you. So remember, doing is the way to becoming an awesome leader. Recently, the lady PMs at Shopify, some of you are in the house, awesome ladies, have been running a series of leadership events for PMs. And they're great events, but unfortunately, we always have problems finding enough women to invite. But we can combat that. Through focusing on doing, we'll all continue to climb higher and higher and even higher mountains towards our own version of awesomeness. And one day, it's my hope that finding women to invite to some of these events will be super easy. Thank you.